Good evening, colleagues, and thank you for taking your time out of your evening to attend this national ballot webinar for secondary members. My name is Adam Sutcliffe. I'm the EIS president, but I'm also a principal teacher of modern languages. And joining me is our general secretary, Andrea Bradley. Before we get into it, I'm just going to talk about the importance of this new ballot. We're reballoting because the members who voted overwhelmingly in favour of taking action. And it's simply the anti-democratic and anti-trade union legislation which has forced us into this ballot. The reballot was agreed by a large majority at our executive committee, which is made up of teachers just like you and me. These thresholds mean that 50% of our membership have to vote. So it's so important that everybody who has the eligibility to vote actually posts the ballot and puts that ballot into the post box. No other democratic elections have these thresholds. So we are asking you, our members, to vote again because we believe this is an important first step for teachers to take control of their workload, which has spiraled wildly out of control over recent years. And we're in an election period. So it would be remiss of us not to take to task politicians seeking our votes, particularly the politicians who promised this reduction in class contact time and have failed to deliver. So, you know, in the time leading up to this election, it's almost incumbent upon us to put pressure on these politicians. But it's crucial that we thrash these thresholds this time, as it strengthens the arms of our negotiators, not only in this dispute, but also in other aspects of our campaign and also in future pay negotiations. If you remember, we won the Pay Attention campaign because we were strong and didn't back down in the face of pressure. We got a better deal for teachers. And we want to get a better deal for you all again, but this time not on pay, but on the workload burden, which is crushing us all. Colleagues, there's going to be an opportunity for you to ask us any questions once Andrea has finished speaking. So please feel free to put any questions in the chat. And it gives me great pleasure to hand over to the EIS General Secretary, Andrea Bradley, who's going to address some of the issues that members in the secondary sector have been sharing with us. Andrea.
Thanks so much, Adam, and thanks to everyone who has joined this evening's call. I want to just, highlight first of all that this workload dispute is part of or a subset of a wider workload campaign. This is not the only thing that the EIS is doing to campaign for an alleviation of the workload that teachers have been struggling with for so long. But this dispute is part of the wider Stand Up for Quality Education campaign. And if you remember, the aims of that campaign overall are to leverage significantly greater funding for public education in Scotland. We believe that the education service in Scotland is currently significantly under-resourced and significantly understaffed by teachers. There are 1,688 teachers fewer today than there were in 2007 when the current government first came to power. And there are more than 4,000 teachers short. We are more than 4,000 teachers short of the target that was promised by the SNP in 2021 ahead of the last election. So there's a lot of ground to be covered in terms of, getting the right numbers of teachers into our education service. And that shortage, that shortage in the numbers amounts to understaffing, and that's a key reason why workload is so high. That's one of the key reasons why workload is so high. And that situation has been compounded by the fact that we now have 43% of children and young people in mainstream education with a recognised additional support need. And that also is contributing significantly to the workload that our members are experiencing. And our members have told us that, you have told us that time and again in our survey work, our research work, and in the independent research that we have commissioned, from academics across the UK. So that lack of ASN provision is also a key contributing factor to levels of violent, aggressive, distressed, dysregulated behaviour in our schools. We know that that's a real problem too. And that's also a generator of workload. The work that has to go in to remedy those behaviours, to follow up in the paperwork, the reporting, the interventions afterwards, that's all a significant generator of workload as well. And that's on top of the physical and psychological injury that these things cause, as well. So we know that workload is a real issue because our members have reported that they're working the equivalent of 1.5 days per week extra unpaid. And at the same time, they're grappling with large class sizes, significant numbers of young people with additional support needs, behaviour issues such as they are at the moment. And in the secondary sector, of course, our secondary members continue to grapple with SQA, or now Qualifications Scotland related workload, which we've never actually managed to properly get a handle on, so workload as an issue is definitely there in the secondary sector. And as Adam has already pointed out, all the promises that we've heard from the Scottish Government and all the promises that we've heard from COSLA on behalf of local authorities to finally do the right thing to bring teacher workload under control, those promises have not come to fruition. And in fact, we've been talking for 5 years about the promise to reduce teacher class contact time to 21 hours per week maximum, recruit 3,500 additional teachers, and all of that, none of that talk has come to anything that is tangible or concrete that is going to have a positive impact on the working lives of our teachers. So that is why we had to resort to the first industrial action ballot, and that's why we, having only missed the threshold, the anti-trade union threshold, by 3.4%, having just missed it, we are very, very keen to go again and to give our members another opportunity to have their voices heard so that we can force the hand of government and employers to finally do the right thing by teachers and by young people, and do something about teacher workload. I think it's interesting to note that in the first ballot, the turnout by secondary members was 49.8%. We were 0.2% from the secondary sector away from getting over that threshold. And of those 49.8% of secondary members who voted, you voted overwhelmingly in favour of strike action and action short of strike. And in sort of like reviewing, why we missed the threshold by 3.4%, we've done a lot of intelligence gathering, and we've gathered feedback from a range of sources about, what might have been in the minds of our secondary colleagues, such that we fell short by 0.2%, of the secondary cohort in meeting the threshold, and overall by 3.4% in meeting that threshold. And there's been a number of bits of feedback that have come to us about things that might have been in the minds of secondary teachers specifically. One of them, and this would pertain to, to colleagues in the primary and special sectors as well, is a general nervousness about industrial action. So we want to, reassure you that industrial action is always a last resort. When we ballot our members on industrial action, it is about acquiring the leverage that we need in negotiations to be able to press for better for our members. And then when at the point, if we get enough people voting, we then secure a mandate that we can then use, a mandate for industrial action that we can then use again as leverage in the negotiations. And we really look to get a resolution to the dispute before we actually have to utilise that mandate, put it into action, and bring our members out on strike or initiate action short of strike. So really balloting our members is about increasing the leverage that we have and the sway that we have in the negotiations, as Adam has already mentioned. It's really a way of giving power to the elbows of the negotiators, because we already know that because the EIS has been balloting members this time around, that the Scottish Government in particular is feeling the pressure and is beginning to do things behind the scenes to possibly lead us towards a resolution, but we are not there yet. Secondly, we've had feedback that members in the secondary sector are concerned that shortages of teachers in some secondary subjects and in some geographical areas will mean that it's simply not possible to implement the promises that the SNP made, and then of course they became the Scottish Government, and that promise landed in the programme for government. So they're worried that there aren't enough teachers to cover the number of learning hours that they would be if class contact time was reduced for individual teachers. But we wanted to reassure secondary members that there is no expectation that this will happen tomorrow. Although we want the promise to be kept, we're very, very pragmatic in our approach to this, understanding that there are gaps at the moment in certain subjects, and that part of the agreement around how all of this will be implemented will have to include how we're going to recruit the requisite number of teachers across the range of subjects and in the geographical areas where there are gaps currently, how we are going to do that. That will all be written into the agreement. And the kind of working assumption at the moment is that because we have a surplus of a surplus of primary teachers, that these changes would occur first of all in the primary sector, and then in a couple of years to 3 years, 4 years time in the secondary sector. So it would be done on a phased approach basis. And we have a precedent for this because when class contact time was reduced previously from 25 hours a week maximum to 22.5 hours a week maximum, round about 15 to 20 years ago, we had to do a very, very similar thing. And it was in that situation, secondary teachers who got the reduction first of all, followed by primary teachers a couple of years later, because at that time there was a surplus of secondary teachers and a shortage of primary teachers. It seems that the Scottish Government and COSLA just can't seem to get workforce planning right, and we would want in the agreement that we would negotiate the mechanisms to ensure that they get better at the workforce planning piece of this, so that there are the teachers in situ to be able to honour these promises for all of the teachers in our education service, primary, secondary and special education. So I hope that that's given some reassurance on the teacher shortage point. Kind of related to that, there was a worry expressed by some secondary teachers that shortages would result in them maybe teaching only senior phase classes, and the teaching of their subjects in the broad general education, S1 to S3, would be covered by non-specialists, non-subject specialists. And that then potentially impacting in the longer term on young people's subject choices and then course numbers and reduced course numbers, and that resulting in other issues later on down the line. But we're clear that again, a proper approach to workforce planning would have to be included within the agreement that we would be seeking to negotiate around this, and we've already begun drafting out what that might look like. We would want there to be proper provision around workforce planning to make sure that all of the gaps are filled, to make sure that the teaching complements are evenly shared across all colleagues teaching in the secondary sector. And we think that could be enabled with the phased implementation plan that just because of the demographics at the moment in the teaching profession will be the reality. It will be on a phased basis, and there has to be a proper approach by the Scottish Government and COSLA on behalf of local authorities to recruitment of potential secondary teachers. They have to work together to make the teaching profession a more attractive career option for graduates or students who are on course to complete their courses and might be thinking about teaching as a career. If they do something about workload and do something about the appropriate staffing levels in our schools, then that makes teaching the more attractive career option that it should be. Another piece of that jigsaw relates to the potential for dual qualification. This has already been talked about in some of the national groups to be a potential solution to some of the workforce planning issues that there are at the moment. And there's discussion underway about how potentially some of the primary teachers who are qualified and don't have permanent work might be supported through GTCS processes to become dual qualified in secondary. That depends very much on the degrees that they've undertaken and how many degree credits they have acquired, but there would be potential for some of those teachers, if they wished, to pursue a dual qualification route. And similarly, we know that there are lots of teachers in secondary who are qualified in more than one subject within their degree, but they only teach one of those subjects. Sometimes that's just down to jobs availability, and it's not necessarily through choice that they don't get to teach the other subjects. but it's down to what jobs are available at the time. But there could be routes to support those teachers to become dual qualified and to be dual registered then with the GTCS. The EIS very much believes that you should only be teaching subjects if you're qualified to teach them. And thankfully, we've gathered some traction for that argument nationally already across a range of different subject areas. So dual qualification could be another element in the workforce planning piece that would address the shortages that we see across some subject areas currently and some areas of the country that are a bit more remote, rural, beyond the central belt. There are things that we could do there to alleviate some of those pressures. Another query that people have had, and this has been common again across the primary and the special sector too, is fear of cuts elsewhere to the education service if this promise were going to be honoured, because obviously it requires additional teachers, it requires those additional teachers to be paid, and that obviously has a price tag attached to it. But what we're saying to that, what we're saying to government and employers about that, is that the two manifesto commitments that were made in 2021 were made unconditionally. So the promise to reduce teacher class contact time, the promise to recruit additional teachers were made as promises of additionality of resource for the education service. They were not made on the basis that cuts would be made elsewhere, and the EIS and the other teacher unions on the teacher side of the SNCT would be arguing again, negotiating again for there to be provision within the agreement that guaranteed that these changes would be fully funded and wouldn't come at the expense of any other aspect of the service. For example, ASN, for example, senior promoted staff having to do more cover. We're looking for the requisite number of additional teachers to be employed permanently in our schools in order that the full extent of the promises that were made can be properly delivered. Some members also, I mean, quite unusually, but maybe a significant minority, some members articulated that they were actually content with their workloads, and that they were obviously happy to have permanent jobs. And so because they were quite happy with their workloads and they have permanent jobs, they weren't prepared to vote in a ballot that was about workload and about creation of additional jobs for the teachers who don't have them. And I suppose, like, we would say in response to that unions are about the power of the collective. They're about individuals coming together so that their collective power is greater than the sum of their individual parts, and that way we can press for better for everyone. And membership of a union is always about solidarity with your colleagues and the collective strength that comes from that solidarity. It's how we won the last pay campaign. It's how we won the one before that, and we're very clear that it is how we're going to win in workload for members as well. And what we would say to those members, or anybody who has that view that things are okay for them just now, is that thousands of their colleagues, thousands of colleagues, particularly in the primary sector at the moment, their fellow union members, they don't have permanent work and they're struggling to make ends meet, quite literally, struggling to keep a roof over their heads, struggling to pay their bills. And we know that because we get a significant number of applications to the EIS Benevolent Fund from members who are struggling financially, many of them because they do not have security and permanency in their employment. So there's a large number of them. There's a large number of teachers in Scotland who are on precarious contracts. That it's into the thousands of teachers who are in that situation. And alongside them, we've got tens of thousands, even if there's a small minority of people who are not struggling with workload, we know that there are tens of thousands of our members who are struggling with excessive workload because of the understaffing of our education service. So what we would say to members who maybe feel that things are okay for them at the moment, even if you're doing okay now, think of your colleagues and vote for better for them, vote in this ballot, because that is how the EIS is absolutely sure that we're going to be able to negotiate better for those thousands of colleagues who are currently struggling with precarious or no work. And we believe also that the more teachers that we have employed permanently in our schools, the better it will be for our learners, I mean, that's a no-brainer. So it's you know, it's not just about the teachers, this dispute, it's about the learners who we all as teachers very much care about. And the other thing to say is that at the moment, while some of our members may not be so affected by issues of workload and may not be so affected or affected at all by issues of precarity and joblessness, it's not them now, but who knows what's going to be coming on down the line as the pressures on public services intensify. Next time it might be them, you know, who are in a difficult position, and they will be looking for the support and solidarity of the tens and thousands of other EIS members, you know, who may not be as directly affected as they are next time around. And we would say that to lose a ballot, you know, for the EIS to lose a ballot would mean that we weaken our power as a union. And if our power is weakened, then we are less likely to be able to win for members in the future on pay, on class size, on additional support needs provision, including, you know, additional PSAs, all of these things that we know matter very much to all of our members, or certainly the majority of our members. And these things, you know, they matter so much that they appear in our manifesto, which we launched just last week in preparation for the electioneering that's going to begin very soon, as we get closer to the Scottish Parliament elections. So, you know, winning this ballot is really important if we want to be able to win not only this dispute, but to win on future issues that might, you know, that might be next in line for this type of taking on of the Scottish Government, taking on of our employers, so that they will invest more in education, because we believe Scotland can more than afford to invest more in education. And again, we've got evidence independently gathered that shows that quite clearly, and that is reflected in the manifesto that we published last week as well. So this dispute is it's a really important component of the Stand Up for Quality Education campaign, which, as you know, is about workload, it's about additional support needs provision, and it's about the behaviour of pupils, the really, really difficult, challenging, you know, distressing, dysregulated, violent, aggressive behaviour of pupils in our schools. These things are all interlinked, and you know, that's all been kind of laid out quite clearly in the Stand Up for Quality Education documentation, all the meetings that we've had about it. You know, this campaign is a kind of long range campaign that's got different components to it, but we need to be strategic in how we go after the different objectives that you know that there are in there. And we believe that this has to be the next one. We've made inroads already on behaviour, we've made inroads already on ASN provision, albeit not enough, and there's a lot more to press for. But we believe that in terms of workload, this is the crucial step that we need to take, that we need all of our members to take. We need everyone to exercise their, you know, their democratic right to vote, even if they wish to vote no, but not to impede the democratic rights of others by us then falling foul of the anti-trade union laws, which say that we have to have more than 50% of our members vote in the ballot in order for us to gain a legal mandate. And that is, you know, that's the only thing that we fell short on last time around, because the votes for strike action and action short of strike were overwhelming. But as I say, it's whether you wish to vote yes or whether you wish to vote no, it's important that you vote, because by being ballot strong, we are union strong, and that means that we can be stronger in negotiations for our members, stronger in campaigning for our members, and for children and young people and their education going forward. And those are the main questions or the main bits of feedback that have come through from secondary members thus far. But there might be other questions that you have, so I'll pass back over to Adam now, who will lead us into the Q&A section of the meeting. Thanks, Adam.
Thanks, Andrea. Really, really interesting. And those questions reflect feedback I've had from secondary members in my area up in Aberdeenshire, particularly as a rural authority. The question of shortage subjects and availability of teachers is a real one, and I think that's why, you know, some members maybe didn't vote or maybe voted no because of they're worried about how that might affect them. But I think you've covered that very clearly and very concisely, and given us a good answer on that. We've only got one question, so I'll read the question out, and then you can answer it. So I really agree with the premise of this question as well. This system of voting is slow, expensive, and a waste of precious resources, paper, transportation, print, etc. What are we doing or plan to do to change this unfair, unsustainable law? Is it a UK or a Scottish law problem?
So it's a UK
Yeah.
law. The good news is that the law that this that demands this sort of process for a ballot like this is in the process of being repealed, or elements of it are being repealed. And in the not too distant future, we won't have the thresholds that have been so troublesome for us, just in recent weeks. Those are going to be removed. Um, and there's going to be a consultation by the UK government on a potential move to electronic balloting, the kind of which you might see in political party voting for their leaderships, etc. Other types of voting internationally that that are permitted by through electronic balloting. And we're in no doubt, we and the rest of the trade union movement are in no doubt that these laws around statutory balloting having to be postal are quite deliberately designed to make it as difficult as possible for busy workers, busy teachers, busy public sector workers, or busy workers in any sector of the economy to participate fully in the trade union democracy. So the kind of postal element coupled with the 50% threshold in terms of number of members voting, and then the additional thresholds that apply if you're in a certain sector of the public sector, and that applies to teaching, where you have to have 40% of your members vote overall for the action that is being proposed. These are all quite deliberately constructed, quite deliberately architected to reduce rather than enhance the likelihood of industrial action by workers as the last resort towards gaining an objective that they've not been able to achieve through negotiation alone. So it's quite they're calculated. That these laws have been calculated. They've been quite vindictively put together. And as I say, the good thing is that many elements of that legislation are in the process of being repealed. And in fact, by the time we get to the end of this ballot, should we secure a mandate, and I very, very much hope that we do secure a mandate this time around, we will only have to give 10 days notice to the employers of industrial action rather than what was required before, which was 14 days. And on down the line, once the UK government issues what's called a commencement order, the thresholds that are so sort of strict and exacting, and that really got in our way just a few weeks ago, those will be removed as well. So yeah, UK law. But we use that UK law to sort of leverage as much as we can by way of good behaviour around all of this from the Scottish Government and Scottish public sector employers like local authorities who are the employers of teachers. So although it's a UK derived law, it applies here. And as I say, we do use the politics of it to try and shame the Scottish Government and local authority employers into behaving as well as they possibly can around industrial action matters.
Thanks, Andrea. Don't have any further questions. I've just got a few messages I'd like to give, if that's okay, and then we'll wrap up early and let people get back to their busy lives. Colleagues, I'm going to ask you a few questions for yourselves to answer, and if you can answer yes to any of these statements, then we're asking you to vote yes to strike action and yes to action short of strike. So if you want less teaching time to plan and prepare for, we're asking you to vote yes, yes. If you want more time for planning and preparation for ASN support, we're asking you to vote yes, yes. If you want additional teachers to share the existing workload, then vote yes, yes. If you want more work for NQT or RQT teachers, which will reduce precarity and hopefully stop the exodus of GTCS registered teachers, then vote yes, yes. If you want a reduction of stress and improved teacher wellbeing, then please vote yes, yes. If you disagree, if you don't agree with any of those statements or all of those statements, then use your vote. Vote no. Use your vote. Use your vote. Don't lose it. As Andrea said earlier, taking action as part of a union is an act of solidarity. It's an act of solidarity with those who are working way beyond the contracted hours or with those who can't get permanent work. It's an act of solidarity for the profession, which, if you remember, after COVID, we were lauded for the work we put in, but now seems to be neglected because we've got on with the job and we do it for the kids. It's an act of solidarity for our friends and our family who would like to see less stressed, less tired, less overwrought versions of ourselves. So I'd like to thank you once again for your presence here on what is a very wet and very windy Wednesday evening up in Aberdeenshire. Please look out for your yellow envelopes if they've not already arrived. And please, please ensure that you post your ballot return as soon as possible. And also pass the message on to your colleagues. Encourage all your colleagues and friends of your colleagues who are teachers. Encourage everybody you can to vote. We need everybody, every member who is eligible to vote in this ballot over the next 4 weeks. Thank you once again for your time.
Thanks, Adam. Thanks, everyone. Good night.
Bye, colleagues.